It's such a pleasure to see all of you here on what has turned out to be a beautiful evening in Minnesota. So I'm glad to see you here in this cinema space. My name is Mary Cerruti. I'm the executive director of the Walker Art Center. And no, thank you. I am delighted to welcome everyone here. I want to start by acknowledging that this place, the land and the place we are gathered, and where the Walker Art Center is situated, is I'm not sure what the grammar is there, the homelands of the Dakota. Thank you. Is. And that this, and in addition, this place holds meaning for Dakota, Ojibwe, and people of other Native nations. And we often start programs with that acknowledgement, but I want to add to that and say that the Walker was founded by a man named T.B. Walker in the 19th century. He's often referred to as a lumber baron. And I think that means that many people in this room will recognize that what that means is that the wealth on which the Walker Art Center was founded and built was the result of extraction of resources from lands that were taken from Native tribes. And so I think while all non-Native institutions have benefited from the history of that displacement and that theft of those lands, the Walker has a very specific and particular relationship to that history. And so I think about that a lot, and I think our staff, we think about that a lot. We've had a lot of conversations about that, and we want to bring a real understanding of that to when we work with Indigenous artists and Indigenous audiences. And we also recognize that we have an obligation to ensure that the stories that we're telling, the story of our own founding and the stories that artists and others are telling, that we're platforming, are illuminating these histories truthfully. So I would say that brings us, in some ways, in part, to tonight's lecture. So before I introduce Sterlin Harjo, the Mack Lecture series has been a long-running series at the Walker. It examines the critical issues of our time by presenting and bringing in leaders in these cultural and other and multidisciplinary spaces whose ideas are really shaping and informing how we think about our world and how we might think about our future. So the series is made possible by the generous support of Aaron and Carol Mack, who are with us this evening. Thank you very much, Carol and Aaron. And we really couldn't think of a better speaker to relaunch this program with. As my colleague, Pablo de Ocampo, who many of you know, who's our curator and director and curator of Moving Image here at the Walker, put it, Sterlin Harjo's important body of work has cemented him as one of the most important and exciting storytellers of our time. Sterlin has literally changed the way TV gets made, not simply through making visible Indigenous stories, but by cultivating and supporting an ecosystem of Indigenous directors, writers, actors, and other film talent. Sterlin Harjo is a founding member of the 1491s, a native sketch comedy troupe with members across Minnesota, Oklahoma, and Montana, and is perhaps most widely known as the co-creator with Taika Waititi of Reservation Dogs, a comedy drama series that follows 4 Indigenous teenage friends in a small town in the Muscogee Nation, filmed in Oklahoma. Hopefully many of you saw our free screening watch party of Reservation Dogs last Saturday that we held here, in case you didn't stream it, although it seems like most people did. Because after its first season, Reservation Dogs in 2022 won a Peabody Award, a Television Academy Honors Award, and an Independent Spirit Award for Best Comedy Series. It continued to gain recognition throughout the end of its series in 2023. In addition to Reservation Dogs, Sterlin's films have also screened at the Sundance Film Festival, including his first feature, Four Sheets to the Wind, which was nominated for a Grand Jury Prize. His recent documentary feature, Love and Fury, chronicles the lives and work of more than a dozen contemporary Native American artists over the course of a year. And it was acquired by Ava DuVernay's Array and released on Netflix in December 2021. Another thing you can screen if you don't have that on your watch list and haven't seen it. We are thrilled that Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan will be joining us later to moderate the post-lecture conversation. My colleague Amanda Hunt will more properly introduce Peggy later in the program, but I want to thank you in advance for being here, Lieutenant Governor. I know you have a very busy schedule, and we're thrilled that you're here for this important conversation. So thank you all for being here tonight. I'll advance and thank Sterlin in advance. But I also want to really a big shout out to our colleagues in our moving image and our public engagement, learning and impact teams who have really shaped not just tonight's program, but an itinerary for Sterlin this week that ensured that he was able to connect with members in the Twin Cities community in different formats and different kinds of interactions, which I think is really important about how we're bringing people, how we're using the Walker resources to share those resources with our community. So with that, I'd like to welcome Sterlin Harjo to the stage.
I have an iPad to look off of. How's everybody? Hitchjay Sterlin Harjo Chochifkados. My name is Sterlin Harjo. I am a Muscogee Creek and Seminole from Holdenville, Oklahoma. I currently live in Tulsa. Thank you to the Walker for having me. I was here years ago and showed, I think, my film Four Sheets to the Wind. And I remember we went to we were touring around like Minnesota, showing films and whatever, talking. I remember we went to Mille Lacs, and it was like January, and I knew no better because I'm from Oklahoma. And we were on a boat on a lake, and the guy was like, "You should just jump in." And I was like, "Oh, that'd be a good idea." And I didn't realize until I was in the water that there was no ladder on this boat. And I don't know if you've ever, I'm sure you have, you're all from up here, but when you jump in the water, things happen to you if it's cold. And I couldn't figure out how I was going to get in this boat because there's no ladder. And there was just a rope. And so I'm supposed to like climb a rope and get into the boat. And I thought I was going to die in Minnesota. I didn't die. I finally made it to the boat, and I'm here again to share with you. So thank you for having me and almost killing me before. I have a love for Minneapolis because I started my comedy career here. I was always funny, but like I hadn't quite put it into film yet. And if you watch my first films, they're very dramatic, right? And like, I felt like at the time that's what needed to be done. I knew that from an early age, as I started making films, that nothing had been made before me. And yes, there was smoke signals and there's a couple things, but for the most part, nothing had been made before me. And I had this opportunity to do all of these things. And so I knew that I needed to do everything that I could. Part of the reason why I make dramas and comedies and documentaries is because I just didn't want the wrong person to be doing this stuff. And I was like, I have to do it, I spent a lot of time in panels over the years. At the age of 23, I started being in panels, having these discussions about like, what do we do to break through? How do we tell our stories and how do we get them to the mainstream? And it was years of this. And there would be, sometimes these panels would be in public and sometimes they'd be behind closed doors, and we would just be talking like, how do we do this? And, you know, I felt like I knew the answer, but it was also a very simple answer, and I didn't know if I'd ever get the opportunity to do it. And the answer to me was to tell the truth. Talk about our communities in a way that's truthful. It's about the drama and about the darkness, but also about the beauty and the light and the humor and all of these things like that make a person human. I needed to just be very simple about it and tell these stories. That was so radical, though, that I didn't know if I'd ever get a chance to do it. And I finally got to do it with Reservation Dogs. That was what we talked about a lot in the writer's room, was like, you know, I decided to make the writer's room all native. And FX was very generous in they kind of gave me the freedom to do that. And part of the reason why we had an all native writer's room was because I didn't want to have to hold anyone's hand to tell our stories. I needed everyone to know exactly what I was talking about. And I also needed to not have a non-native in the room afraid to go places that we were going to go. Because some of those places are hard to talk about, whether you're talking about suicide and things like this. And suicide at the time was, the way it was spoken about in our communities was like, it was very taboo, and it was very like, people were afraid to talk about it because you don't want to give it too much power, right? And that's very understandable. But there comes a point where I think that you have to address it and tell the truth about what is happening. And that was one of our main goals in making that show, was telling the truth. And there's a reason why you don't know what happened to Daniel for 7 episodes. And it was to prepare people for what was eventually going to be told, which was that he took his own life. But I didn't want it to be exploitative, and I didn't want it to be there for shock value. I wanted everyone to be prepared for what was coming. And so by the time that we got there, we could say it and not be afraid to say it. And that was the point of why that we rolled it out the way that we did. I'm super honored to be able to be one of the people that told that story. Every day of my life, I'm reminded of the power that it had and has still. It's amazing to me, the people that come up to me every day and say, you know, it changed my life. It made me not feel alone. It made my son sit on the couch and watch something with me. It was something the whole family could enjoy, grandma, grandson, and it made people feel seen. And I think that that's something very simple that when you grow up Native, you didn't have. You know, we didn't feel seen, and it's so important to feel seen because you feel like you're not alone. And if you're not alone, there's power in that, and you can continue to be here if you don't feel alone. But again, my comedy career started in Minneapolis, and I was showing my second film, Barking Water, at the Pangea Theater, I think. And Ryan Redcorn has a little cameo in it, and I said, Ryan, you want to drive with me to Minneapolis and show this film that you're in? And he's like, yeah, I'll do that. And so I had known Migazi Pinsino before, because I was actually an advisor of his at the Sundance Labs. And through him, I knew who Dallas was because they were making stupid videos up in Bemidji. And they were doing something, they were tapping into something that I thought was really funny. And I said, Ryan, we should do some things with them. And so we came to Minneapolis, got in touch with them. Oh, and we'd met like Bobby Wilson, who was like living on couches at the time, I think. Minneapolis' own. And we met Bobby at the Santa Fe Indian Market. And he just like latched on to us. And somehow like, I was the only one with a hotel room. Somehow everyone ended up in my hotel room. And I remember I came home pretty late, and Bobby and Ryan were asleep on my bed. And as Bobby tells it, I walked in and said, oh, hell no. And then I made Ryan scoot over, and I told him he's riding bitch, and he slept in the middle of me and Bobby. So anyway, we come to Minneapolis to show this film. We get in touch with all of them, and we're like, let's do a funny video, and they're like, yeah, let's do it. And Bobby at the time was doing a mural project with youth at Little Earth and had a key to the building. And we were coming up with all these ideas, and we couldn't quite figure it out. Everything felt stupid. And so we took a break, and Ryan Redcord and I remember we drove to an Arby's somewhere, and we were in line, and it hit me. I just remembered that the poster for Twilight New Moon came out, and it had all the werewolves with their shirts off, like looking sexy. And I was like, man, that audition process must have been insane. What if we make a video about the New Moon Wolfpack auditions? And so Ryan called Muscogee and was like, here's what we think we could do. And they were like, oh, hell yeah. And so we went back to their house. I think it was Dallas's house at the time. Bobby got some woman's undergarments, and we put together some costumes, and we went to Little Earth with the key, and we went in there, and a friend of a friend had a camera and met us there. He was actually from Oklahoma, and we filmed the New Moon Wolfpack auditions. And I just remember like that being a highlight of my life. I always wanted to experience things when people talk about like, oh, you could feel it in the air, like you could feel this like thing happening, something was shifting, you know? And I'd never felt that until then. And we made this video, and it was so funny, and it was so fun to make, and we were just like dying laughing the whole time. And I remember Ryan and I driving home, and I edited it once I got back to Oklahoma, but I remember we were driving home, and we were just like on this high, you know? And Ryan's never drank alcohol or smoked weed in his life, which I can't say for myself, but Ryan has been sober his whole life. He was born sober. And he was like, I've never got high before, but I feel like I know what that feels like now. And I was like, we were talking about this, like, yeah, man, it was like something shifted. Like something in the world, the universe shifted. And it was so simple. And it was just like, and our whole goal was like, let's make something where Native people can go online and laugh and see our humor on display. And so we edited it and put it out. And back then, like, there were no like weird algorithms in Facebook. So like, if it was popular, it was popular. And it was popular. And like it was like blowing up. And we were like, holy shit, like people like this. And I remember Dosh Collins, you probably know him from his physique. He sent us a video. He was at some conference, and he sent a video or a photo. And it was of all of these like aunties and grandmas, like these elders were sitting around at someone's laptop. They'd showed them, they'd pushed play on this thing and showed it to them. And they were all cracking up laughing. And I knew then it was like, oh, wow, something like did shift. And so then we were like, well, we have to figure out a name if we're going to keep doing this. And so we came up with the 1491s. And we just kept making these videos. And it led to a life of, you know, I had a film career. But that was like few and far between. You make a film every few years, you get paid nothing. An independent film, you get paid nothing. You travel around with it and you show it to different people. The 1491s opened up this other sort of like avenue for money and work. And it was us traveling to reservations and showing these videos. And then we developed a live show and started like doing sketches and stuff live, which I hated, but like I had to do it because I was a part of the group and I didn't want to do it. But you know, like what it really taught me though was how to film comedy. I think people don't realize that filming comedy, like there is you have to do it. Like you have to be very specific about filming comedy. The camera kind of has to set up the joke for you. And doing the 1491s over and over and over, we learned how to work and we learned how to, I learned how to film comedy. And I also learned how to bring out good performances out of people and learn how to improvise and encourage people to improvise and find the right ways to get performances and the right ways to make something funny. And it was just a lot of trial and error. I mean, like there were times when we were up in Bemidji at Dallas and Miggsy's dad's place, Tom Goldtooth, and we would just be like there for a weekend, and we would just film 10 videos, you know, in the snow, and make them up as we never wrote anything down. We just improvised everything. So we'd have an idea, we'd start filming it, and then if it wasn't working, we would just discuss and rework it, which led to us writing a play later, and which led to us being in the writer's room for Reservation Dogs. And it taught me how to bring out the best out of other artists. And so whenever I first got the job to be the showrunner for the Reservation Dogs and run this writer's room, I knew how to do it because of the 1491s. And that all really, truly started in Minneapolis, you know, like right here. It was pretty amazing, you know, and I have a lot of love for this place because of it. I'm not gonna go through like my whole life. It's amazing, and I'll write a book about it. But you know, Res Dogs was amazing. I mean, I come from rural Oklahoma, and I always wanted to tell a story about rural Oklahoma and what I saw. What I saw was like Native humor, and what I saw is community, and that's what I wanted to tell a story about. I have a friend named Taika Waititi. He's a good friend to have, and you know, I saw him. We were just like shit asses making independent movies for a while and short films. And we were traveling around doing film festivals and traveling together. We would do a lot of Indigenous film festivals together. And so we just became friends, and we were very similar in our backgrounds. And that's how we became friends. And then I saw him sort of skyrocket into stardom, like where he couldn't walk down the street anymore. And that was with Thor and all of that, you know, and I watched that happen. Then he got an Oscar and all of that. And I always knew that like I didn't want him to feel like I wanted something from him because he was my friend, you know. I wasn't like, I didn't want him to think that I was trying to get something from him because I saw people around him all the time trying to get something from him. And now I know how that feels. It's like you can feel it, you know. I could feel that. I saw him going through it, and it was life-changing for him. And so I never wanted that, and I just made us. It wasn't like a big proclamation, but it was like I just noted it. Like I'm not going to try to get anything from him. Like he's my friend, and I'll be his friend. And you know, we spent many hours talking about life and things like that. And I was just a poor independent filmmaker the whole time, you know. And I remember one time, Sundance invited us to show our film at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. Robert Redford was there, and he introduced us, and we showed our films. It was me and Taika, and I remember we went to this private club that Taika was a member of, and I gave him, I remember checking my balance before I left Oklahoma, and it said $1,000, which I thought was a lot. You know, I was like, I'm doing pretty good. This will get me through New York, and I remember we were at this dinner club, and you know, of course, you don't realize a few bills come through and just wipe you out, and I gave him my card, and it was declined. And Taika just pulled his card out and gave it to him, and like paid for it. Nothing said. Paid for the rest of my trip in New York, you know. But eventually, I started making TV shows, and not making TV shows. I started like I always gambled, and I never left Oklahoma. And I was like, I think that at some point, because the industry, Hollywood, would not fund any of my films. Because they were about Native people. And they would say that to you back then. It's not cool to say anymore, so they don't say it, but they still feel it. Not as much, but they still feel it. And I was just like, you know what? I think at some point the film industry will change, and I'm gonna just stick it out and keep making films and just be truthful to what I want to do. And so that's what I did. I made a lot of independent films in Oklahoma. And at some point, I got a job. I got a job as a consulting producer on this show called Scalped. There was a graphic novel, and it didn't end up getting made. The company was bought right in the middle of us filming it, but I realized that at that point, oh, there's like work in TV. Like I could probably do this. And so I started, I went and got an agent. I didn't even know you could get an agent. I thought like they had to ask you for years. I didn't realize like you just got to call them and they'll be like, okay, I'll be your agent. And so finally I called and I got an agent and I started taking meetings in Los Angeles and I started getting work and in TV. And I got the job to adapt There by Tommy Orange for HBO. Didn't happen, but I adapted it. And it was pre-Reservation Dogs. I think they were scared of it. And I sold a show to Netflix that didn't happen. But I was working and I was hanging out with Taika when I would go to LA. At one point he was like, I have this overall deal at FX. If you have any ideas, you should throw them at me and let me know. And he and I had been reading each other's scripts forever. Like when he had a script, he would send it to me. When I had a script, I'd send it to him. Or if we had an idea, we'd talk about it. And I told him, I said, what if we combine these two ideas that we never made? One was mine. My dad was a martial arts instructor since I was 4. And so there was just every weekend, we would load up in my dad's Oldsmobile in the 80s. And we would drive and fight in tournaments. And we were just like scrappy, small town Oklahoma kids. We knew how to fight. We couldn't do anything else. And it was some really fun years. But it was like, I had this script that I wanted to do where there's this like native recluse who's a martial arts expert that lives out in the woods. This character ended up becoming Uncle Brownie, who is my dad. By the way, my dad's name is Brownie. Everybody calls him Brownie. And they dress just alike, Uncle Brownie and me. And so it was about these kids that were getting bullied in school, and they went to this guy who was this legendary fighter, and they asked him to teach them how to fight. And he doesn't want to, but they finally convince him to, and he has them come in the house, and he has them like vacuuming and stuff, and they don't know if it's like Karate Kid, wax on, wax off, or like what's going on. And that's as far as I got. I never finished it. And then Taika had one that was about a kid in a Maori village who decided to become a vigilante. And he made himself like a Batman mask. And he would just sit on top of a little house in this Maori village, this small Maori village. And he would just sit there and like watch the neighborhood to see if he saw some crimes, And no crimes were happening. And it was those two ideas that we started kind of going back and forth, and we came up with Reservation Dogs. The character in my script ended up becoming Brownie. They're trying to get him to help him fight, and things like that. And then in the first episode, they become vigilantes. They decide that they're going to fight for their home. And the 1491s, we were commissioned to write a play with the Oregon Shakespeare Festival called we called it Between Two Knees. And thank you. And thanks. And thank you. I'm sure you haven't seen it yet. It's good. I just played New York. And we got commissioned to do that, and we were in Ashland, Oregon. And I got a call from my agents, and they said, what the fuck is Reservation Dogs? And I was like, oh, that's the thing that Taika and I came up with. They're like, well, they just offered you a deal to write the pilot. And it was like a week later. I thought it was going to take like a year before I heard from Taika ever again, because I had written it down and sent it to him, and I thought like I'd hear from him in like 2 years or something. But they bought it, and we were like, that was it. We started writing it, and we were about to shoot the pilot, and the pandemic happened, shut us down. And I was like, of course, this would happen to the first native show. It shuts down, and we won't ever get to make it again. But to FX's credit, they called me during the pandemic, and they said, we're committed to making this. We'll hire you to write 3 more scripts. And so I wrote the first 4 episodes. And then we started making the show. And as you know, it was really popular, and it did break through. Non-natives love it. Natives love it. I was making it for Native people. I wanted them to be very proud of it. If other people liked it, great. But first and foremost, I wanted Native people to like it. It was very scary putting that out. I remember just being terrified and hoping that it connected with people. There was there were ups and downs, you know, there was good and bad. My life changed, it flipped upside down. And I remember after the first season, my dad said something to me that really kind of hit me hard. He said, he was like, you know, you gave Native people a reason to lift their head up a little higher. And that was like really impactful to hear from your father, you know, who's kind of seen my whole career. It just meant a lot. It brought a lot of changes. I can see the changes today, you know, like I can feel those changes. There's more comedians, there's more people doing videos and films. And that's been really special to see happen. Like I didn't know all of that would happen. I think the biggest impact is, like I said, people telling me that it helped their family with mental illness, and seeing that it's not something that someone else is dealing with. It's something that we're all dealing with. And how mental illness has a ripple effect, and suicide has a ripple effect, and it could affect everyone. And all of us that were making it, and all the actors, everyone had a Daniel, you know. Like we all knew a Daniel that we were basing our emotions off of. I was basing it off someone. They were basing it off someone. There was a moment where it's in the first episode when everyone's smudging and they're like, kind of the memorial service for Daniel. And I remember I stopped before we filmed that, and I gathered the actors up and all the crew waited outside, and I played them a video of the Daniel that I knew. And it was of him singing Happy Birthday in a native language to a girl that he was friends with. And it just, you know, it affected everyone. And it affected everyone because they all knew someone that it had happened to. And so that show was made with that sense of responsibility that we knew that that's what we were talking about. And we needed to get it right. And it was an honor to do it, but it was also super, super scary. I mean, you know, you have to go to therapy, you know, because your life goes upside down. I mean, I went from like, you know, I'm recognized now, and that's something that I'm not like, you know, like young people that are filmmakers here, like I'm not like a person that seeks this out. Like I'm not comfortable getting recognized. Like I don't like that. It's not why I do it. It is something that I accept, and for me, that is the job. I accept that, but it's not something that I naturally love. And so you have to deal with all of that, and you have to navigate it. And there's not a lot of Native people that have done this before to kind of teach you how to navigate it. So you kind of have to come up with it yourself. There was, you know, I think but whenever I think about this industry, the film industry was like, it's been corrupted from the beginning. I mean, it's like set up to be corrupt. You know, it's set up with hierarchy. It's set up with power. And it's set up with, I'm on top and you're on bottom, and we're going to treat you that way. And that's not how I grew up. That's not how a lot of Native people grew up. And we've been a part of the film industry from the very beginning. I mean, like Edison was filming us back in the day with some of the first film cameras. And that first job that I got on Scout, I was a consulting producer, which kind of is a glorified word for the Indian they hired to make sure no one gets mad at them, you know. And that's what I was doing for that show. And, you know, but once I got there, they realized that I was a good writer and creative, and they wanted me to kind of help write it. And I got like a lot more power within that show, and was able to my voice was able to be heard. But there was something that I noticed when we were filming that, and the history of like the way extras are treated in the film industry, Native extras, is really bad. We would always be put, you know, back in the day, it was like they can live in tents and teepees while everyone else is in hotels. You know, we don't have to treat them like human beings. They're going to be in this Western, and, you know, they're just Indians, like that's all. And they would get to eat last and all of that stuff. And so as I was on that set, it was an all-Native show. It was all Native. And I remember seeing the extras, the Native extras that were there to help this show. And I remember, you know, in the film industry, there's a hierarchy. All of the people on top go eat first, and then the middle people eat next, and then the extras eat last. But as you know, in a Native community, you feed your guests first. You know, it's a show of respect to invite your guests in and feed them. And extras are like guests. They're not like getting paid a lot. They're not making the show. And I just saw the faces on the extras as we were all going into the place to eat. And I could see that they were kind of like confused because they weren't actors. They weren't film industry people. And I went to the producer and I said, why are they not eating? Because I didn't know either. I'd never been on a real set, you know. I was like, why aren't they getting to eat? And they were like, oh, they're extras. They eat last. And I was like, man, that's fucked up. Like that's just such a sign of disrespect to a Native person. Like, we should let them eat first or let them eat with us, you know. And I didn't know any better that everyone thought I was insane for saying anything. But I wouldn't stop talking about it. And I was like, and so they wouldn't change it. In the end, they wouldn't change it. But I started eating with them. And so I would just go and eat with the extras. And just to let them know that someone that was a producer, you know, appreciated what they did. And I told myself that after that, any show that I had, I was going to change that. And so when we made Reservation Dogs, that's what we did. I told every assistant director and producer before we started the show that it was really important for me to feed the extras with us and make sure that they got coffee and that they were taken care of just like everybody else. And so going into it, everybody knew that. And that little thing, just me changing that one little thing, changed everything. You could feel it. You could feel the respect. It felt like a community. It felt like everyone was involved. It felt like they were proud of the work. And it's hard no matter what, but they felt a part of it. And it made a really big difference. It also helped that my family is most of the extras, you know? So like if they are mean to my auntie or like my grandma or whatever, like they're going to get in trouble. So like everyone just kind of like, to this day, like everyone on the crew just knows, like, don't ever treat an extra bad because it could be his mom, you know? And like my mom would literally show up on set and be like, that guy was pretty rude. I'm like, what do you mean? She's like, we're just trying to park. And he told us to park over there. I was like, well, that's crew parking. Like, you got to park over there. You can't just pull up to the front. She's like, I don't care. Like, okay, you know? And so everybody kind of knows my family now. They know like how to treat them. But that little thing was so special and so meaningful and changed everything. And that spreads to everyone, right? Like everyone starts treating everyone differently. And if you were on the set of Reservation Dogs, it was such a community family affair. I mean, it was like hard to make the show because we just wanted to hang out. And I mean, for instance, the Muscogee Creek Chief Hill, we have a traditional food called sofkey. And I had forgot to get this traditional food for the episode where Laura's grandmother's dying. And it opens with the feast. I'm like, God, we can't do this without a shot of sofkey in the beginning. And the props guy is a white guy from Louisiana who's really rad. And he was like, I don't know how to make sofkey. Do you? I was like, well, I can, but like, what if we get somebody to make it? So we called Chief Hill and he was like, oh, my mom will make some. And so Chief Hill, she passed away a couple months ago, rest in peace. But she made us this giant pot of sofkey and it's in the opening. You know, and it's so like gangster. Like she made it the night before. I got my props guy driving to her like on a dirt road or whatever. She's trying to meet him and like bring this giant pot of sofkey for one shot. But that's how we made the show. And it's what made it special. I think everyone can feel that, you know, like I think that the audience that has no idea how it was made, I think that that everyone can feel the love that was made in that. Also, we would, you know, like every set has a medic. Well, our medic had, you know, ibuprofen, whatever, but then also like cedar bundles, like things like medicines that like people traditionally would want to have, you know? Or, you know, for instance, when we filmed, there's a scene where Daniel has hung himself and we don't really see him, but we see his feet. All of that was just very thought out and like how we were going to approach that. But we also, you know, had ceremony before and we had somebody sing and I didn't exclude the non-native crew people. Everyone was there and everyone came in. And so like my non-native crew members on my crew, they are all so down now. Like they all know what's up on a Sterlin Harjo production and that we're going to take these steps to do this stuff. And they'll make time for it in the schedule. They'll schedule out these things, and they'll know, like, or they'll come to me and say, this is like a heavy thing. Like, do you want to take time with people and have somebody there? I'm like, yeah. And so during that whole episode, we had an elder there that would sing songs and just kind of every day kind of like remind people why we are telling this story. Another example, she just texted me, dear lady did. She did. Another example is when we were filming that scene, we're doing the boarding school stuff. And that was so intense. Like, I didn't know how intense that would be. Walking on set, and you have all of these kids dressed in boarding school clothes. And you're in an actual old boarding school where they used to have kids. And it was so intense to sit there and watch these kids be kids. Because, usually someone depicts a boarding school, everyone's going to be sad and depressed. But kids aren't sad and depressed all the time. They're laughing and they're joking. And they're laughing and they're joking and they're getting in trouble for it and whatever. And these kids were just like funny and like having fun and finding the joy in everything. And I'm like, that's how it would have been. Outside of the pain and outside of the abuse, they would have found joy in all of this. And so that was really heavy to watch and to see, to walk on set. And I was so like stressed out during that shoot because I have all of these Native parents and I made them all the parents came on set. But they had to be outside of where we were filming inside the school. And so we had all of these parents out here, and I was so like stressed because I'm just like, this is so heavy and so real. And I just wanted to make sure everyone was okay. So I wasn't directing that episode. My friend Dana Goulet was, and I would go in between the kids and the adults, the parents, and just say, here's what's going on and here's what's happening. And they just really appreciated kind of me telling them everything's okay, because I didn't realize how heavy that would be. I should have. But the elder, my friend Woodko, I had him come and say something before we filmed inside the school. And I knew none of this before he came in there. And he came in and he said, he told this story. And he said, my dad was taken when he was 4 and put in a boarding school, and he was put in this boarding school. And every night, he would cry himself to sleep, and he would sing this song to this star because he knew that's the direction of where home was. And there's a certain point where he started talking to the kids, and he wasn't talking to actors anymore. He was talking to these kids in the boarding school, and he was saying, this song is about not giving up, and I want all of you to never give up. And like, he was telling them, like, I don't want you to give up. Like, you're here. And you're here because of bad reasons, and you're here, but like home is waiting on you. And so he was talking to kids that were in a boarding school. He wasn't talking to actors anymore. And so everyone's crying, and then he sings this song that his father would sing at night to comfort himself at this boarding school, And it's just so powerful, and it's just crazy. I didn't, these things would happen while we were shooting. There's a moment where they cut their hair in the episode. And obviously we know how heavy and crazy that is and how important the truth of that is. And we had a crew member who had a young nephew who was in mourning, was going to cut his hair. And he said he wanted to cut his hair on camera for real. And so we were like, are you sure? And she was like, yeah, he wants to do it. And so we were like, okay. And so we set it up. We rehearsed this scene like 50 times without the kids, just to make sure the nuns and everyone and the camera and everyone knew what we were doing and what was going to happen. And this is the beauty of having Native crew on my crew. My friend Pierre, who's Lakota, he said, while we were all kind of working through the camera and all this stuff, and like when you're talking about camera, I mean, it is the crew's job to just talk about logistics. They know that the makers of this thing have dug down and written about the heaviness of what we're about to do. Their job isn't to also talk about that. Their job is to say, well, here's how we'll shoot it. We'll light it here. We'll put a light out here. This light, that light, that light. And as they were doing that, and there were a lot of non-natives mixed with natives on my crew. And Pierre said, can I say something to me? I said, yeah. And he said, he addressed the whole crew. He said, we're in the space where the hair's going to get cut. And he said, what we're about to film, it represents one of the worst days of my life, worst times of my life. And he said, I went to boarding school and I was really young. And he said, they cut my hair without telling me why they were cutting my hair. And he said, I'm Lakota, and I thought that my mother had died. And so they were going to cut my hair because I was in mourning and she had passed, and that's why they were cutting my hair. And he said, so for 2 weeks, I thought that she was dead. And I would cry all the time, and no one told me what was going on and why I cut my hair. I just thought that my mother had passed. And again, everyone's crying, and, because everyone loves Pierre, and the non-natives love Pierre. He's on the crew, and, he told the story. It just kind of brought us all to, like, what we're doing, like why we're doing this. I also cast friends as nuns just so it'd be like familiar, and like, but it was very, very heavy, and it was like, and he did cut his hair, and I was so frightened for him to cut his hair for a show, and I remember seeing him after, and he had this big smile on his face, and he was very happy. And I think that he was very happy because he helped tell the truth of what it was, and it wasn't fake hair, it wasn't a wig that we cut. It was the actual thing, and I think that was important for him as well. So there were so many instances like that, and it just felt like what I learned doing that is, I'm checking my notes just so you know. I think that what I learned is that there are different ways I can change this industry for myself and my people, and all it takes is me. Right? I can change that. And I knew after that I would never, I knew through that process that that's how I would make stuff. And it actually was like kind of how I always made stuff, because I was an independent filmmaker just making films with my friends. My family just kind of grew around me, and I just made it the way that I thought it should be made. But that's not always how it was. I mean, like, coming up, there were older filmmakers that were Native that were not very good about kind of reaching down and helping people under them, like they were actually the opposite of that, where actively sort of trying to stop you to protect their own career. And I learned then too that I would never do that. And so it's been a mission of mine to also bring people along and make sure, because it's ridiculous that there needs to be just one storyteller in this industry that's Native. And so with Reservation Dogs, I was very nervous about asking FX if I could have an all-Native crew, because it's just not done. It's never been done, Like, there was 2 TV directors at the time. It was me and Sidney Freeland, And I just told my producer, who's this really great guy named Garrett Bash, I said, I want an all-Native directors on the show. And he was like, cool, well, I'll tell him. And so he told them, and they were like, okay, cool. Like, that's how FX was the whole time. They were just like, cool. So it's really important, I think, for Native people, young Native people, to know that there are allies, and you cannot do what you want to do just working in a vacuum. You have to collaborate with people that are not Native. And you have to find the right ones. Like, yeah, there are ones that aren't great, but without asking and without talking, without educating, without having the patience to say, this is why I'm doing this, they won't ever hear you. And so, they let me, so we created 4, that first season, we created 4 Native directors in TV all of a sudden, which is historically a really hard sort of practice to get into. It's like, it's very closed off. And then we added more after that. I mean, Devery Jacobs, who plays Elora Dannon, I invited her to be a writer on the show, second season, because while we were making the first season, I started asking her, like, what do you think Elora would do here? Like, do you think she'd, or she'd come to me and be like, I don't think Elora would say that. I'm like, okay, cool, why? And then she would tell me, I'm like, you're right. And because of that, I was like, I need her in the show. Like, I need her in the writer's room to write. And so she came in and wrote, and then season 3, she directed. And I already knew that she was a director, so it wasn't like a crazy jump, but like I knew that she could do it. She it's funny because she always tells a story and it always makes me mad, but it doesn't make me mad, but she always misses a few things. No, she doesn't miss a few things. The intent is what she misses, because when we were doing auditions for Reservation Dogs, she wrote me, we were friends, and she wrote me and she said, hey, which she's like 31, right? Like she's like not a teenager. And she was like, hey, I'm gonna audition for Alora. And I was like, I don't know if you should. Because the reason behind me, I said, you don't know if you're old enough. I don't know if you're young enough. You look young enough. Which that's what the story she tells. But there was also more to it, which is I didn't want to hurt my friend. I didn't want to say, you didn't get the part. So I was very nervous about hurting my friend who was about to audition for my show. Obviously, she looks young enough. But I was really nervous about her auditioning. And then she did it, and I was like, oh, of course, like it works. But Hollywood also did this thing where they would, I think I'm over time, but I'm going to keep talking. 2 minutes, is that? 20? 2 or 20? 12? I better fucking hurry. What was that? Did you say? Great. I'm going to skip a few and quit telling long-winded stories. But how I grew up, it really influenced the show, right? Like I grew up in a community. I grew up knowing that there was a bigger thing that I was a part of, and that I needed, my mom like drug me to shit all the time. Like my dad's Brownie, Uncle Brownie, recluse, loves edibles, likes to hunt, lives out in the woods. My mom also lives out in the woods, but she doesn't stay out there. She goes to town all the time and gets her nails done and whatever, And she is a community person. And that's what I learned from her. She's always worked for the tribe. She would drag me to every function, every gathering. Anytime someone died, it didn't matter if we were kin to them, they were our cousin. And she would be there making food and taking food to the family. And she would drag me to these things. And as a kid, I was like, oh, God, I gotta go. What is this even? Like there's a calendar. This is the best. There's a calendar that I'm in the 80s for the Seminole Nation, where my mom decided to get me and be models in this calendar. And so we had zero traditional native, like Seminole clothes, maybe like a yarn belt or something, or like whatever. We had a couple things. I wore my aunt's 80s leopard print pants wrapped around my head as a turban. And she found something that kind of looked like a feather that was more like, I think in the 80s they liked peacocks, a lot. For some reason, like peacock lamps and stuff. I had one of those in my head. And like I had like 80s, total 80s, like green, like, I don't know, straight out of like 16 Candles shoes. They were like women's boots that I was wearing. And I look insane. And there was a calendar. Luckily, the only pictures that survived are black and white, so you can't see what I'm wearing. Like, you can't tell that it's leopard print, kind of. It was more like zebra prints, but you can't really tell because it's kind of folded up. But she always drugged me to things. And like every time we'd walk in a room, she was like, that's your cousin, 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 that's your cousin. Like people I didn't know. Go shake all their hands. And I'd have to just go through and like shake everybody's hand. And all of these cousins and everything. And I hated it when I was young. But I love it now. Because no matter where I go down there, they all know me. Every one of them know me. And there's respect that they give me because I was that kid doing that all the time. And, I'm going to wrap it up and we're going to talk more. But, we ended the show with the funeral and the digging of Old Man Fixico. And that's so none of that is false, and the episode where Laura's grandma's dying, like that is my grandma dying. Like everything that happened There's a moment when Big, Zahn's character, comes in, the cop, and he's got a squash, and he says, he gives it to Willie Jack. He's like, here, brought that. And she's like, fuck am I supposed to do with that? And she goes, I don't know. He's like, cook it up. Shit. And he walks off. That was what, that really happened. And it was actually a crazier story. My grandma was dying, and we all gathered for a week while she was passing. And different people would come every night and sing songs, and we just cooked food. We had a chili cook-off. I thought I had some like special recipe I was going to throw at them, and it was with cinnamon in it. And I actually dumped like half of a thing of cinnamon in it. And it was awful. Everyone made fun of me. They still make fun of me this day for that chili. And but my what was I saying? Oh, the squash. So my grandma was passing away. We're all sitting around telling stories. My uncle, who Big is based on, he's passed away now. I had family pass away every season of Reservation Dogs, and really important people. And Zahn was based on my Uncle Junior. And Uncle Junior was very paranoid about Indian medicine and spells and dark magic and stuff. You know, he's always scared somebody's putting some shit on him or whatever. Like anytime we had a gathering, he lived in Tulsa, we lived in a small town. Anytime we had a gathering, you'd call him and you'd be like, are you going to be at the gathering? He'd be like, yeah, I'll be there. That means he wasn't going to show up. But if he said he wasn't coming, he would show up because he didn't want you to prepare something to put on him and cause him problems. So we're sitting there, and Ryan Redcorn knew my grandma, and he loved my grandma. And so Ryan came to show his respect, and he came to the my grandma's house where we were all singing and cooking and hanging out. And my Uncle Junior was in the front room telling stories. He told stories a lot. And I saw Ryan pull up. And so I went outside. And I said, hey, Ryan. I was like, what's that? And Ryan walked out with a squash. I swear to God, it was like this big. It was this big. It was huge. He walked out like that. And I was like, what the hell is that? He's like, it's a squash. And I was like, I've never seen one that big. And he had it's an Osage squash or something, you know. And he was like, I was like, you haven't met Uncle Junior in person, but he'd heard all these stories about him. I was like, I want you to just walk in. Don't say a word. He's going to be sitting right across from you when you walk in the door. Just walk in with that squash and hand it to him and don't say anything and just walk off. And he's like, all right. And so Ryan walks in with this squash, and I'm kind of waiting by the door. No, I go in first, and Ryan walks in with this squash, opens the door, walks in, walks right up to my uncle and just hands him this squash and goes, and then walks off. And my uncle's just holding the squash. He looks at it, and he's looking at all of us, and Ryan's already talking to everybody else, saying hi. And I heard my uncle, he leaned over and he goes, why do you think that white man handed me that squash? Another story, real quick, and then we'll do our thing. You know the moment when Lily Gladstone, the great Lily Gladstone, who we all love, the moment where she's telling Willie, just like everyone's favorite moment, she's telling Willie Jack to pray, and the ancestors appear behind her, and they touch her shoulder. You know, that episode was inspired by my Uncle Marty. My Uncle Marty one of my first words was jail, because Uncle Marty was in jail all the time. And he wasn't a violent person. He had a drinking problem, but he was one of the most charismatic, great people you've ever met in your life. Everybody loved him. Hilarious guy. But he was just in and out of jail. And strangely, in jail, he read a lot, and he watched a lot of movies. So I could actually, like he and I remember one time he got out of jail, and we had a little like reunion for him, or like a party or whatever. No alcohol, but a party. And he was, of course, by a truck sipping alcohol out of a little red cup. And I went over there and I talked to him and I said, man, what's going on? He was like, asking me what's going on. He's like, you know, your mom's been sending me, I first started in the film. He was like, your mom's been sending me all of these, all of the clippings of you in the newspaper about what you're doing. I think it's really cool. And I was like, oh, thanks, you know. That kind of surprised me. That surprised me. And then he said, you know who my favorite filmmaker is? And I almost fell over when he said that. He's like, you know who my favorite filmmaker is? And I was like, who? He's like, Steven Spielberg. And I was like, why? And he was like, well, he's like, I think that he creates a world that is his vision of the world. And that's why I like his films. And it blew me away. Like, I never heard my uncle say anything like that. And then I also realized that he reads a lot in jail, because he was in jail on and off all the time. And he was such a good human being that I wanted to make an episode that was about someone, a Native person that was in jail. We all have family that was in jail. and it doesn't mean they're bad people. And I wanted to tell a story about someone that was a good person that was in jail. And while we're filming that scene, my dad's playing a guard. The real Uncle Brownie is a guard, and he's the one that tells Willie, Jack, and Lily to quit hugging. I'm at the monitor. We're about to shoot that scene where the ancestors are there, and my dad comes up to me and he says, "Hey," and I turn around and he said, "Your Uncle Marty died just now," and it was so crazy. Because like the whole time I'd been thinking of my uncle while we were writing it, while I was directing that episode, while we were shooting it. And he passes away right when we're doing this thing about ancestors always watching over you, you know. So like all of that to say, like we made Reservation Dogs, and yes, it was a show, but it was also more than a show. It was big, and it touched a lot of things. And I think that, you know, as artists and anyone listening, like if you tell the truth and you are relentless about the truth, you end up touching the truth, and you end up touching something deeper that is the truth, and you end up teaching people about the truth, and you end up teaching yourself about the truth that you never knew was the truth. And all you have to do is really stick to that, I think. And so that's what we did with Reservation Dogs, and I think that's why it was so impactful, and it definitely was impactful for me. Thank you very much.
Whew. Sterlin, thank you for your storytelling and your change making. I'm going to wipe some tears away before I introduce our next esteemed guest, who will be in conversation with Sterlin. Peggy Flanagan, Ojibwe, is Minnesota's 50th Lieutenant Governor, a member of the White Earth Band of Ojibwe, and currently the country's highest-ranking Native woman elected to executive office. At the center of all of her work is making progress for children, working families, communities of color, and Indigenous communities, and Minnesotans who have historically been underserved and underrepresented. Thank you for your work. As Lieutenant Governor, Flanagan has led the governor's office to help secure key legislative wins, including establishing the nation's first missing and murdered Indigenous relatives office, increasing the Minnesota Family Investment Payment program payments, securing historic investments in affordable housing and childcare, and investing in equity and bonding to support community projects led by and for people of color. It is for these reasons and others that we really were so happy and thrilled and hoping that you two could be in dialogue tonight. So please join me in welcoming our Lieutenant Governor Flanagan.
Feels like one of those old talk shows where I moved from like I did the stand-up bit, now I'm in the...
It's like Sally Jesse.
Yeah. I was going to say Johnny Carson.
Johnny Carson, that works too. Well, wow. So I am so grateful for you for so many reasons, and just I'm so appreciative that you're here and that you came back to Minnesota after we tried to kill you. So that's exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's one of those places.
For sure. Yeah.
Doesn't matter how many times they try to kill you, you keep coming back.
That's right. You can't quit us.
That's right.
So I wanted to just, well, first of all, Peggy Flanagan, Indigenous, Gijuwewe Damakoy Indigo, Guabagagan Kagnan Junchaba. My English name is Peggy Flanagan. My Ojibwe name is Speaks with a Loud and Clear Voice Woman. I am a member of White Earth, and my family's the Wolf Clan. I'm really happy to have you here.
Badass name.
Thank you. There's a lot of responsibility with that name. I was like, oh shit, right when I got it. So.
My last name, Harjo, means crazy in battle. So that's also kind of cool. Yeah.
Also, that's a big name, for sure. If stuff starts to go down, we'll just look to you.
Call us.
Yeah, that's right.
She'll talk and I'll be there backing her up.
Follow him. Okay. I wanted to say, Reservation Dogs, I think for many of us, was like the first time that we'd seen ourselves really reflected. And I'm like, which episode do I talk about, right? Do I talk about the power of that moment with Willie Jack being surrounded by her ancestors and now having that added context about Uncle Marty? Do I talk about Dear Lady, which just felt like so cathartic for all of us? do I talk about Alora's grandmother dying and the house being full of people, and having that be a window into the same experience with my dad. Like, you could be like, we could tell how many people love my dad by the number of shoes that were lined up by the front door. And so I think what I just want to say is thank you. And thank you, I think, on behalf of all the folks in this room.
Thank you. There's also a Minnesota connection to that episode as well, my Uncle Marty, because so what you do in a writer's room, you come up with the outline and the idea. Like, I might come in with an idea, and then we kind of what they call breaking story, and then you come up with kind of the outline of it. And you can write it, or you can assign it to another writer. I assign it to Muscogee Nation, who is from up here, and he came to me after the first day. So it was inspired on my part by my uncle. But he came to me the first day and he said, I don't know this character. I don't know how to do this. I was like, yeah, you do. He's like, what do you mean? I was like, it's your mom. Just write your mom, who's also from up here. And he said, oh, okay. And then he went and wrote it. It was like that easy.
His mom is dope.
Yeah.
And she is proud of her son.
She very much is.
And she will talk about her son all day
She's
long.
probably
Absolutely.
here.
Yeah, is she here? She's here in spirit. Right. She looms large, right, for sure. So I want to talk a little bit about, and you name this, I think, in just representation is incredibly important. I think about here, we have some folks in the audience who I think are doing really big things in spaces and places that weren't necessarily created by us or for us. I think about Sean Sherman, who's here from Awamni.
I'm still full.
Yeah, right? It's good. I was like, did you have the corn
And I have to
taco?
go to another dinner.
Yeah. Or I think about Kate Bean, who is leading the the museum, and you know, being in these spaces, it matters when we can tell our own truth and when we tell these stories on our own behalf. And I think the power of you just being like, I'm gonna make it for Native folks and see what happens, and I hope people like it. What gave you sort of, can you tell us about the films or the series, or, you know, other than Twilight, clearly, that created those pathways for you to be like, I feel like I can just do the dang thing in this space that wasn't necessarily, you know, made for us or by us?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, like, part of it was being so naive, too. Like, I was just like, of course I can do this. Like, of course they're going to want to hear this thing, you know? And, like, a lot of that helped me have the courage to do it. But, like, I'm a fan of movies, you know? Like, for a long time, I never wanted to be called a Native filmmaker. And it wasn't until I started traveling and meeting other Native filmmakers from other communities that I was like, oh, like, I'm proud to be a part of this community now. Like, I'm a Native filmmaker. But at first, I didn't want to be called that because I didn't want to have to just identify with who I was personally with what I wanted to do professionally. But at a certain point, that shifted. And I was like, oh, no, there's, like, so much rebellion and pride in that, that I began to kind of embrace that and be proud of that. But, I mean, to be honest, the thing that I first watched was... The first thing that I remember watching going, oh, they make this. They make these things, was Michael Jackson's The Making of Thriller, where you saw them making the werewolf costume and all of this stuff. I didn't know that people made that stuff. I remember seeing Star Wars as well and kind of being blown away. But I was also never, like, censored by my parents. I could watch anything. And I remember at a way too young of age watching Platoon, which, you know, there's an homage to Platoon in the pilot when he gets shot with the thing. And I watched that. I remember watching The Lost Boys, Stand By Me, which all had influences on this. Later, I watched Friday, which had influences on this. Friday for me was like, you know, South Central LA is always portrayed as, like, really scary and dark and crime-ridden. But Friday showed the joy and the humor and the love in the place. And I was like, well, the res is always portrayed as dark and scary and empty and hopeless. I want to show the other side of that, which we all know is true too. And yeah, there was just so many. And then when I got to college, I started watching, I got into like the French New Wave, and then I got into like, Jim Jarmusch films and John Cassavetes films, and films that were like, they were saying something, and it was almost an act of rebellion to even make these things, Like John Cassavetes used to make films with his wife, Gina Rollins, and his buddy actors who were famous, but like they would work for him for free. And he would make these $30,000 films that tried to get at something more human. And they were not polished all the time, but they said something, and they were full of emotion. And you feel like you're in the living room with these characters. And I fell in love with that. I fell in love with the fact that the French New Wave, like Francois Truffaut, their whole thing was like, there's the old saying, like Shakespeare would say, like, or I think Shakespeare, was he real? I don't know. But he would say, I remember when he said this, I quote him, and but he was saying like the world is a stage. Well, then the French New Wave took that, because all of the films were made in studios for a lot of money then, and they took that and they took the cameras into the streets, and he's quoted as saying, the world is a soundstage. And we can take because the cameras were lighter at this point, they started making lighter cameras, and they started taking these cameras out into the real world and telling their stories. And I was inspired by that, because there's something so raw and fresh, and I can touch that, And so those are the people that kind of inspired me to make films. Mm-hmm. Robert Altman, his films. Yeah. I mean, Robert Altman was a big inspiration, and Richard Linklater, like Dazed and Confused and Before Sunrise, and Robert Altman's films like McCabe and Mrs. Miller and Nashville and all these, and they're known to have tons and tons of characters, and everyone's talking in overlapping dialogue, and it's messy, and there's a lot of zooms and like if you watch the last episode of Reservation Dogs, there's all of these zooms that you'll be seeing someone talking in the foreground, but then you're picking up Uncle Brownie and the uncles in the background and zooming to them, and then it'll pull back and it'll show somebody in the foreground. That's all Robert Altman ripoffs that I wanted to always do, So, and that was kind of the beauty of Reservation Dogs, is we got to kind of, each episode was like an homage to films that we loved, Yeah.
I mean, and every episode was like a journey, and you knew that you would just be pulled in. Incredible, just comedy, blurred out eyes of owls, right? I was like, oh, white people are not going to get that joke. But I was like, it's for us. And then just really so emotional, right? Like the episode with Bear's dad, like, ooh, I felt that. Like I was like, okay, here's the journey we're going on. We're gonna laugh in the beginning, we're gonna get drawn in, and then we're gonna weep right at the end. And so I think, like every episode was like a film. Right.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think that like, I have a lot of people always ask me like, was it hard to do the comedy and drama together? And for me, I was like, no, like that's just me. Like it's so me. And also the community that I come from. And I think that like Native people know humor and we know tragedy. And if you're survivors at all in this world as a people, you know how to survive. And part of that is through a sense of humor,
That's right.
And so I think that just kind of naturally came out. But yeah, I would be bored if it was just sad or just funny,
Absolutely. I want to talk a little bit about, you said like, not a lot of folks will say that anymore. They're like, oh, we're not going to make that film, or we're not going to work with Native people. Some people still say it, and I want to get your opinion on this or your thoughts. I was recently in an elevator with a lobbyist from Comcast, or I should say a cable company. I don't. Can you edit that out of the video? I don't know. Let's keep it between us, everybody. Cool? Okay. And, he was talking about the programming, and have you watched this? Have you watched this? And we were in an elevator full of lieutenant governors, which is a thing that happens. And I was like, well, man.
Passing around a joint.
I know. That's right. That's how we stay cool as being second in command. It's legal here in Minnesota for adults. It's totally fine. But we were talking about Rutherford Falls, and I was like, man, I said, it was heartbreaking. It was so disappointing that, that show was canceled. Right. And he goes, nobody watched that show. Right. And it was like one of those record scratch moments where like other lieutenant governors were like, what's she gonna say? And I was like, well, maybe it's because y'all didn't market it. Right. And then I was like, bye. Right. Like got off the elevator. But what are the things, and I still don't, I think he's a Peggy Flanagan. Of course she's not Native, right? Like, but I think that there still can be an attitude like that. How do we start to break through those spaces? And it sounds like the experience that you had with FX was amazing. Like for folks who are coming up in this industry, or maybe how do you find those allies? Like how do you figure out if people are really down or not?
Yeah, I mean, that's such a difficult thing to navigate because it's like, I hit so many dead ends, like over and over and over and over and over until I hit FX, and I still hit dead ends to this day, and I mean, I think being true to yourself is the only thing you can do. And no matter what, I didn't wait for them to give me money to make stuff. I made films for $50,000, $100,000. I never got paid. No, sometimes no one got paid. And we made 1491's videos for no money. We spent our own money to make those videos, but people saw them. And so I think no matter what, you don't ask for their permission. You keep making the thing until they come around. And I think you have to do that.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's right. Can you talk a little bit about the 1491s? Because I think for many of us who saw those videos on YouTube and would send them to everyone, right? Like we're like, have you watched this? Have you seen this new one? Now we are seeing, I think these sort of visions and dreams come true in a way that like I didn't even think was possible, right? Can you talk a little bit about the work of the 1491s and how that just really came into play with the creation of Reservation Dogs, and like how does that inspire you to keep pushing, or like the improv of it? Clearly there is improv in Reservation Dogs as well.
Yeah, I think 1491's like up until Reservation Dogs was the most important thing I'd ever done. And it was also the least lucrative of anything I'd ever done. So that doesn't add, those things don't correlate. But the joy that we saw from people seeing themselves in the humor that they were seeing was so like groundbreaking to us, and we were there every trip that we would take. It was just a dream. It was a total dream. We would be backstage getting ready to be announced to come out, and we would just look at each other sometimes and go, man, fuck, can you believe this? Like, can you believe that they're all here for this? Like, we're just like making dumb jokes on camera with no budget, and they're into it, and it was like, I don't know, like that was some of the most special times I'd ever had, because we didn't have money and we were traveling around, but we believed in what we were doing, and people were responding in a way that was so amazing. I mean, like just the people that we met, like I don't remember her name, and I won't try to mention it, but there was even a woman here, the elder of the eldest, hanging out. She was always at like kind of this, any sort of gathering or center that we were at, she was always here. She was always like so encouraging to us and like what we were doing. There was also Shan Goshorn, who is an amazing basket weaver artist. She's won everything from Oklahoma. And it was people like her that encouraged us to keep going, because we didn't know if what we were doing was, I mean, like, who knows? We weren't making a living, But she would say, she was just like such a fan of ours. When a lot of times kind of the sort of higher up Native establishment were a little embarrassed to tell everyone that they were fans of ours, she was just like, nope, you're doing the thing. Like, this is really important what you're doing. And she was like, you're doing what I do. because like what she would do with her baskets is she would print on the weave, whatever they're called, and weave messages or photos into them. And so it'd be weaved with photos of kids in boarding schools, or it'd be weaved with messages of empowerment or whatever. And she was like, you're doing what I'm doing. Like the comedy is the vessel. A basket is so nurturing. Like everyone from every culture will lean in to a basket because it's what carries water and it's what carries food. And it is a nurturing object. And so people look in and then they get a message when they look in. And she was like, that's what you're doing. Like you're doing comedy, but you're also saying something behind it. And people are leaning into what you're doing. It's like Bob Dylan, not to mention Bob Dylan because he's from here, but like, you know, you hear a Bob Dylan song and it's like, you kind of get with it, you know? It's like, you don't know what he's saying at first. But then once you learn what he's saying, all of a sudden you get this message that he's saying. And also, we stole Bob Dylan a little bit from y'all in Tulsa because we have the Bob Dylan Center and all of his archive. Just saying.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Y'all have Prince, and Prince is the best, so. But yeah, I mean, like, it was people like that kind of kept us going. And I do think it's like the most important thing I did, for sure.
Absolutely.
Outside of what I just did, but.
Also very important. And the next important thing, right, is also coming. So I think I have 2 questions left. I am conscious of time. But one of the most powerful things I think of, you know, what you've been able to do is to lift up a lot of women who are directors and actors watching, I think, right, Devery and the journey that she had, Tasba Chavez, who is amazing. How is that just something you do, or are you your mother's son as she dragged you to community things and, you know, you saw sort of the power of that? Like, you know, I was sitting next to my daughter who was here and she was like being like, ugh, community things. Right. So I was happy for that lesson to be like, and it made me a better person, right? I'm like, that's coming.
I promise.
And like, maybe you can watch Platoon when we get home. But
it's a trade-off.
That's right. But you know, how is that just what you do, or do you like make choices? But it is so apparent that like women have power in the spaces that you create.
One of my first times I ever thought of that. Well, first I was raised by a bunch of badass women, and they are, you know, we're matriarchal. They're just powerful. They're the guys in my communities are just kind of funny, and the women kind of get shit done, and also the disciplinarians, you know. And we're just there to provide entertainment and to you know, to do some cool things here and there. And so I was raised by amazing women. And, you know, I get told that by all my aunts. Like you were raised right by the women that raised you, you know. But also, one thing that happened to me was before I wrote my first film, Four Sheets to the Wind, I did not identify with Hollywood's depiction of women. And I thought that it was very false and I couldn't understand it. And then I started watching French New Wave and I started watching Latin cinema. And I was like, oh, that's where it's at. Like, that's where there are real women on screen. Because I didn't recognize the women that I grew up with on the screen in Hollywood. Some independent films I did, but in Hollywood I didn't. I remember reading Love Medicine, and there's a opening where she's cracking the boiled eggs in the bar, and it's before she passes away. And I just remember the description of that woman, and I forget her name in the book. There's a description of that woman, and I just thought, like, that is like the women that I know. You know, like that's the women that I know. Like they can be anything. They can be flawed. They can be funny. They can be nurturing. They can be all of these things at the same time. And I wrote the character in Four Sheets to the Wind, who was played by Tamara Podimsky. I wrote her thinking of that description of that woman because I had finally read something that I thought described a Native woman in an accurate way. And really what guided me was just trying to write the women that I know coming up. And then as far as like having women, I got asked that a lot, like women in the writer's room and stuff. It's like, you can't truthfully depict your community without having women in the writer's room creating, you know. It's kind of and it's not like, this isn't like, it's not like a political stance that I'm taking. It is just reality. It's like, if I want to tell the truth, you have to include all those voices that help you tell the truth, and that includes women as well.
That's right. It is kind of a political stance right
It is.
now.
I think it's very hard not to be political when you're Native, though. Like, no matter what you say.
Yep. So thank you, for that. Women are important. Turns out we have rights. We should be at tables where decisions are made about us. Thanks for that. So my last question is, what are you making next, and can I be in it?
Yes. I already wrote you a part. She should be. Look at her. She should be. She's like funny, charisma. She could do it. And I'm making a new show right now. I just shot a pilot with a new show with Ethan Hawke, who is Laura's dad in Reservation Dogs. But Ethan Hawke is kind of like, I just wanted to do something really different because I didn't want someone to tell me I have to do the same thing. That's something that's always been in the back of my mind as I make stuff. So it's like a stoner film noir set in Tulsa. Sort of The Big Lebowski meets one of my favorite films of all time, which is The Long Goodbye, made by Robert Altman. And it's full of characters, and there are natives in it, but you know, it's less about anything but this crime that's happening and this person that's investigating it. I'm also doing the Spider-Verse, the Spider-Verse Spider-Man animation. I'm doing a spin-off, a native, but that is a native character. That's a native character. And I pitched, can I even talk about this yet? It hasn't even been announced.
We're sharing secrets
okay.
here. It's totally, can you all keep it to
So
yourself?
there's a character named Puma that is a native character, and I was just in a meeting with them, and they were like, "We have this character Puma. Would you ever be interested in doing something on this character?" And I was like, "Yeah." And then I was like, speaking to the last question, and then I was like, "But what if it's Puma's daughter, and she's an alligator wrestler in Florida, and she's estranged from her father and never knew him, and she's going to assassinate her dad." And that's what the show's about, and the movie's about. And they were like, "Hell yeah." So that's what we're doing.
Awesome. Well, we can't wait to see an alligator wrestler. It's it's absolutely what the people have been demanding. I again just want to thank the Walker. Thank you for DMing me on Instagram and asking me to do this. Real talk. I was like, oh hell yeah, I'll do that. Right?
You're gonna get so many DMs
I
now.
know. I don't read all of them, especially the ones in the deep, dark, scary inbox. Right. But what an honor to be able to sit down with you.
Thank you. It's an honor to have you ask me questions.
I was like, I'm a little afraid. But I want to just say something that, just repeat one thing that you said, which is you can continue to be here if you're not alone. And that is the medicine that you give to us.
Thank you.
And I didn't even know that I needed it until I saw it and I felt it and I experienced it. So Chimiwech for just telling the truth and letting us be a part of it. I'm so grateful. So just please give a round of applause to Sterlin Harjo.
Thank you.